All right, so this is just a quick video in which I want to show you a couple things just in case you want to make reels out of content rather than just kind of longer form videos. And it's a great way to clip things so you can also throw content back onto the drive for other people to potentially use in other situations. So here's what we're looking at. So this is some film a couple students took of a football game recently, which is great. This clip in particular is what we're going to look at for this. So what I want is this scene where he's throwing the ball to him and he's going to run. So it's just this. All right, that right there, that's great. Okay, that's basically all I want. Now, the first thing that I want to do, if I want to clip it and I don't want to affect the rest of this, let's say I'm working on this and I've done a whole bunch of editing, which I haven't because this is just an example. But what I could do is rather than trying to kind of like work within here and then undo things and redo things, what I can do is actually go up to File, New, and create a new sequence. And this will basically create a new area for me to work in. Now, don't worry too much about all of this information. I can just say OK. And then if I grab this clip, which is the one I want, drag it over to here, it's just going to copy it. And then this is where it's going to say, do you want to change sequences to match the clips setting? And I can say, sure, go ahead and change the sequence settings. All that does is it basically matches the sequence rather than, matches the video that you're importing rather than you trying to force a certain kind of settings on it. So in this case, over here, it's a 1080p frame. And in the sequence too, this is a 4K frame. Now, that part's going to be really important if you want to rip a vertical reel. If you're ever shooting sports content and if you think you want to shoot vertical reels, it's really convenient to shoot it in 4K because you can always cut 1080p reels out of 4K. So a couple things to show you before we get started. Now, in this sense, if I'm editing this little one, it's not bad. It's not very long. It's like 16 seconds. And if I get to the end here, it's just going to go black, and that's fine. However, if all I want is really this to here, I can set in and out markers. So on my keyboard, I can use O for out, and then I can go back to where I want it to start, which is maybe like here. He's taking the snap in. Okay, now what I can do is click this loop button, and the nice thing is it will just start looping indefinitely. And it'll keep going back through that time and time again. That's really helpful when you're editing because you can just focus on a certain area. If you don't see this loop playback button, if you go to the plus, you can find it in here, loop playback, and you can drag it, you click and drag it into this menu. Mine's already there, so it won't appear. Next, what I want to do if I want to, again, create kind of a vertical reel from this is I actually want to change my settings. Now, I could color grade and do all that, which is probably smart, so I can maybe brighten this. I can add some contrast. I can really saturate it if I want to make it kind of that certain vibe. I could do some creative LUTs with it. Some people love to do this stuff where, we could do like some faded looks or extra saturated looks. I'm going to leave you to that fun stuff, okay? But I'm going to actually turn that off for now. But what I want to do is go up to sequence again. And on this sequence, I want to make sure I'm clicked on the area, sequence settings. And it's saying this is a 60 frames per second, which is really important. I'll talk to you about it shortly. And then also frame size. So I want to change this to vertical, and I don't want 4K. The cool thing about 4K is it has so many pixels that, again, you can get multiple vertical 1080p reels without losing quality. So what I can do is I can say horizontally I want it to be 1080, and vertically I want it to be 1920. That's the opposite of typically what you think about with a 1080p video. So if I go like that and say yes, and then it's going to crop it like this. And that's okay because I want this to be right here. I want to see this at the start. And then let's see what it looks like now as again, a story or a reel or a TikTok. Okay, now the thing you might notice is he goes out of the picture, so what do? So you have to do a little bit of motion tracking, and it's really, we're going to do simple. In After Effects, you can do a whole bunch of complicated motion trackings, and you can make it look really, really sharp. we're just going to do it in Premiere here. And the easiest way to do it is start on the image you want. Now, in this case, I kind of want it a little bit more of the quarterback here. So I'm actually going to do the scale and the position. But the first thing you want to do is make sure it's exactly what you want to start before you set that keyframe. So we're going to go like this. I'm going to go a little bit shorter so you can kind of see there's a receiver here. Now I've opened that, I just double clicked it and changed the size. And now from here, I'm going to say position and scale. And I've established these keyframes. Then what I'm going to do is go between these two and establish keyframes. So I can click on the clip and I can move it. I can also clip here and go frame by frame forward. So now he hasn't started moving yet, so I'm not worried about this. We are losing the ball, but it's very brief. He's going to throw, and here's where I want to start moving it. So I'm going to double click this. And I'm just going to start moving this to the side as this also goes to the side. And notice what Premiere does is it starts to create those keyframes as it moves. So as long as I keep that in frame and I've already clicked on my keyframes here, it will work just fine. So again, I'm going to go a few frames forward. And then I'm going to pull this. And then what I'm also going to start doing here as the ball's coming to the receiver, because we can't see the receiver, is I want to actually make it smaller or bigger. Smaller? Bigger. Smaller. I'm going to zoom out. Anyway. So notice now that keyframe starts to set as well. So over here, we're starting to see the ball, keyframe, ball, and then the receiver has it. But we haven't quite got the receiver in there. So I'm going to actually make it a little bit smaller. There we go. And then boom, he has it. I like that. But now he actually kind of starts to go to the front. So we got to move it back here a little bit. And there we go. And then he's way out of the frame here. So we need to move this. Then hopefully this stays on him as we go forward. Yeah, there we go. Okay, great. And right there is actually where I'm going to cut it. So this is great. So now let's watch what we just did. And let's fill it so we can see. So what that helps is it makes you feel like you as the camera person, it makes the viewer, I should say, look like you, the camera person, really tracked everything, even though you didn't track everything. It looks a little bit jittery, so one thing we can do is just make these a little bit smoother. We can say, let's just ease out on those so they're not quite as harsh. There we go. And that's perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable. Okay, now the next thing I want to show you, though, is I want to slow it down as soon as it goes here. I want to get boom, and I want to slow this down. So to do that, I can zoom in right here, and I can add keyframes right on my timeline. Now, you have to do one thing first. You have to right-click FX, say Time Remapping, Speed, and then I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard, hover over this middle line, and click it. When I do that, I've created a keyframe. I want to go to the front where I want to see him burst, which is like right here, because now I want him to run through everything. There we go, to the end. So now that I have those two keyframes, I can hover over this center line, drag it down, and whatever the percentage is actually how slow you're making it. So this would be 50% speed of 60 frames per second. So it's going to drop it down to, 30 frames per second. So here we go. So there we go. So now we see him drop it down. Now notice my in and out got kind of messed up there, so I got to fix that. There we go. So I like that it slows, it kind of shows that action, and then it speeds up right here. Now, right now, that's really choppy, so what we want to do is make that a little bit less aggressive. So what we're going to do is pull on this slider and pull on this slider, and you notice it starts to create a slope, and that is basically what you're doing for speed ramps. So now it's this. There we go, and it's just a little bit less aggressive in that transition. So that's effectively how you can make a reel pretty quickly out of video that you already have there. Then, of course, you would go to export it and just do your standard exporting. And you can then post that and show that highlight if there's a really cool moment. Now, here's where I need to talk to you about filming a little bit and why it's really important that you're shooting in 60 frames per second if you're shooting sports. First of all, what that allows you to do, that clip you just had there, is slow down the action. And it looks good, it works well. Now, one of the keys that you have to remember that we talk about a lot for sports is you want to always double your frame rate. So if we're at 60 frames per second, your shutter speed should be double the frame rate. So 60 frames per second, 120, 125 shutter speed. Now, if you want to do what's kind of over cranking it, doing a different shutter angle than 180 degrees, you could increase it a little bit more and it'll create a little bit more of a jittery kind of vibe to it. So you could do it at like 150 shutter speed. Be careful though that you don't do it too much. So I just had one student, which unfortunately I was looking back at their camera because I was wondering why their footage came out weird, and they shot at 60 frames per second, which is great, but their shutter speed was at 640. And so it ends up looking really jittery and odd. And I'll show you that example right here. So here's the example of that. If we go back to this sequence, and I like this scene a lot. It's a cool, fun little moment. And they do this. And actually in real time, it doesn't look bad. And sometimes that over cranking can make it almost look sharper and more engaging. So there's a trade-off, and here's the trade-off. If I try to do what I just did, so let's go ahead and just drag this one to the sequence. I'm going to drop it here, and going by the same principles we just did, I want to, I'm going to crop this, and we're going to put it so that they kind of get right in the middle here. Oops. Let's just go to right here. Okay. And I want to show you this, not so much the tracking, because we already looked at that, but just the slowing down of speed, and you'll see it starts to feel kind of odd. So if you go to speed and we go time remapping and we do this and we drop it down just like we did before. Again, sometimes we have to zoom in a little bit to get our thing. We're going to drop down to 50. And remember, the last one looked pretty nice. This one, check out what ends up happening. So what you'll notice is it doesn't look horrible or anything. It's just, it looks a little bit jittery up there, and it becomes a little bit challenging. Now, it's not bad. It's actually better than the first time I looked at it, but that's what sometimes happens if you over crank your shutter and it ends up looking a little bit odd. But again, it's kind of a preference thing. It's an artistic choice, and you can kind of experiment with it. But ultimately, if you double up your shutter speed, and again, if you overcrank a little bit, so if you double up your shutter speed and then add another 50%, that can make a shutter angle that's kind of interesting and unique to look at. But the bottom line is make sure you're shooting at that 60 frames per second. You can also shoot at 120 frames per second. On some of our cameras, that will mute the audio, so that's a trade-off, but you could always get the audio another way. But that's kind of the overview of basically how you can go from a really cool timeline where if you have a video and you're like, oh, this is a great video, but I also want to make a reel, just add a new sequence. And then when you export, you're just going to export that little sequence out. All right, cool. Let me know if there's any questions. Thanks for watching.